Russia is preparing for a new phase of the war and is creating all the conditions for mass mobilization. Vladimir Putin yesterday, during a meeting with the military, ordered an analysis of the involvement of Ukraine's allies in the war, whom he called instigators of the continuation of hostilities, in order to make responsible decisions regarding them in the future. But this is an obvious attempt at intimidation. You think it's not enough for us, who is helping Ukraine, and in the future we will decide to attack them. And it's funny that Putin says it's actually the Western countries that are inciting the continuation of hostilities. The solution is very simple. The war can end in a second. I'm not saying this to the unwashed Russians right now, just in a second. All Russians pack up their belongings, turn toward Moscow, and leave the territory of Ukraine. As soon as the last Russian Putin crosses the border, the state border between Ukraine and Russia, that's it, the war is over. And we don't need any instigators here. Nobody, absolutely nobody is needed. Each Russian just packs up their things and goes back to Russia. Believe me, no one will chase after you, no one will attack Russia after that. Once the last Russian crosses the border and leaves, that's it, the war is over. I guarantee you that's how it will be. The war will end. Ukraine doesn't need Russian territories. This is a wild tribe. Ukrainians don't need it, the West doesn't need it, no one needs it. Just live there peacefully and the war will end. But that's a bit of a digression. So Vladimir Putin also stated that there
must also be continued analysis of each instigator's involvement in prolonging the war in Ukraine. An analysis must be conducted of each one's involvement in actual combat operations. We need this analysis for possibly making responsible decisions in the future. In any case, we might need this.
And so, explaining his position, Vladimir Putin referred to a joint statement by a number of European Union leaders from June 7, in which, according to him, the innovative use of drone technologies by Ukraine was welcomed. Well, then Putin started playing this propaganda record about how Europe supports these attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces that he made up. On children in a dormitory, on buses carrying Belarusians, on civilian sites and civilian infrastructure on Russian territory, and so on and so forth. Well, of course, Putin forgets to mention that the strikes are on military factories, oil refineries, energy facilities, logistics, and so on. Well, obviously we know why he's doing this. But the point of this statement was different. Vladimir Putin was trying to intimidate the European allies. The thing is, just this morning, literally last night, Putin says, assess the involvement, and already this morning. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation announced the involvement of Baltic states in Ukraine's strikes on Russian infrastructure during recent Ukrainian armed forces attacks on ports in St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region. And next, I will quote the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Galuzin. We have verified data that Latvia and other Baltic republics have already provided their air corridors for Ukrainian drones that attacked our civilian infrastructure. So, in other words, the Russian Foreign Ministry managed to prepare a report for Putin overnight about the involvement of the Baltic countries in the war in Ukraine just like that. Last time, a similar statement was made by the Russian Ministry of Defense. In May, this agency claimed that Ukrainian drones had tried, as they put it, to attack St. Petersburg through the territory of Latvia. Previously, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs representative made similar accusations against the Baltic countries and Finland. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Press Secretary Mashka Zakharova, and the assistant to the President of Russia, Patrushev. In April, they stated that these countries were providing their airspace to Ukrainian drones for attacks on Russian territory. Amid threats from Vladimir Putin to the Baltic countries, the Russian Ministry of Defense has proposed a complete cancellation. Mandatory medical examinations for contract soldiers and mobilized personnel, which determine their fitness for military service, are being proposed for cancellation. The corresponding draft amendments to the law have been published on the Legal Acts draft portal. The changes will be in effect during mobilization, martial law, or wartime. In other words, when Vladimir Putin needs more cannon fodder. The draft amendments introduce a new clause to Article 5.1 of the federal law on military duty, according to which medical examination becomes mandatory only in special cases. If the candidate has injuries, wounds, trauma, or a concussion. if there are illnesses that would qualify him as partially fit for military service, or if there are illnesses that make him unfit for service. Moreover, it is specified that this must be clearly visible. If the illness or injury isn't visible, he's automatically considered fit for service. And if a man does not have any obvious injuries or illnesses, then according to these amendments to the law, the Ministry of Defense sends this man to fight immediately. So there is no need for any kind of military medical board, and it even seems logical. And the day before, experts from the New York Times wrote that after reaching the front lines, a Russian army recruit may survive for only 20 to 35 minutes. The main reason for the rapid deaths of Russian soldiers is the widespread and effective use of Ukrainian drones. And here's a story. Historian Peter Frankopan, citing Russian, let me emphasize Russian military bloggers, writes that after being sent to the front, a soldier in the Russian army can expect to survive from 10 days to 3 weeks. That is, from the moment they arrive at the training ground to their death in battle. Most Russian recruits undergo only a few days of training before they are immediately thrown to the front. As soon as they reach the combat position 20 to 35 minutes later, that's it, the Russian is gone. So why bother conducting some kind of super complicated medical examination? At the same time, recruitment of new contract soldiers in Russia has dropped by 30% this year. That's why the Russian Ministry of Defense is suggesting that military conscripts should only undergo a medical examination in special cases, such as if they have injuries or a serious illness, instead of by default. Well, as you can imagine, no one is actually going to look for any serious illnesses, of course, when Vladimir Putin needs more cannon fodder to supply the front. And here, well, I just want to say, what more proof do you need that the Kremlin is really preparing a new wave of mobilization right after the elections in September? Meanwhile, on the night of July 4th, Ukrainian defense forces attacked an oil terminal in St. Petersburg. This is the hometown of the balding dictator Vladimir Putin. There is a large fire raging at the site. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, stated, and I quote, "Last night, our Ukrainian long-range sanctions against Russia for this war worked near Petersburg. The Ukrainian defense forces struck the port oil infrastructure that earns money for the Russian war. There was also a hit on the Kronstadt base in the Leningrad region of the Russian Federation, which is an important military target. The distance from the state border of Ukraine is more than 850 kilometers."
Damn! Editor. Papa Editor.
Subtitle editor Apapa.
Subtitle editor A. Semkin, proofreader A. Igorova. I would like to note that the St. Petersburg oil terminal is one of the key Baltic hubs for the export of Russian oil products. It handles tanker shipments to Africa, the Middle East, and other regions. This trade is an important source of replenishment for the enemy's military budget. I would also like to note that the alleged drone debris fell in the area of the Vysotsk port, one of the key ports of the Russian Federation in the eastern part of the Baltic Sea. The St. Petersburg oil terminal, which has strategic status, was previously attacked on the night of June 3. And as a result of that raid, which took place on the opening day of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, a major fire broke out on the terminal's territory, and another strike on the terminal occurred on June 6. According to the report from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, a total of 389 Ukrainian fixed-wing drones were intercepted overnight in 19 regions, as well as over the waters of the Azov and Black Seas. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.